Something that feels like it's been a bit of thorn in your paw. Conor Benn, Eubank fight.
Well, I can honestly tell you I'll be glad when it's finished. We are legally bound to say what we've said. The independent panel lifted the suspension, he's okay to box. If that happened outside of that venue, in the streets, Mr. Benn could go in for assault.
Someone's come along and filled the room with a big bag of cash, and all these fights are now being made.
Is that an issue?
Well, it is. Why are you going from Arthur to Martha?
Ben Whittaker has the answers on whether he was really injured or whether he wasn't. He knows that he's going to look a complete tit if he doesn't perform the way he should, so he's going to want to let the answers be done in the ring, because it is one of those fights that, until that bell rings, we don't know. Isn't
it the case if someone's made a bad set of decisions, that the better course of action would be that they don't referee any fight, because each fight, at whatever level it's at, is important to the individual fighters until such a time as the board is satisfied that they have the credentials and the qualities to be able to do it whatever level it's at?
I don't fully agree with that. I'm a big believer you fall off a horse, you get back on it and get on with it.
Welcome to episode 116 of Talk Boxing with Simon Jordan and Spencer Oliver. Today we're joined by the General Secretary of the British Boxing Board of Control, Robert Smith. Robert, nice to see you.
Good afternoon.
Spence, nice to see you as always. Let's kick off with something that feels like it's been a bit of a thorn in your paw, which is the Conor Benn Eubank fight. It's gone from failed drugs tests to egg slaps. How difficult has this fight and all the sideshow that's gone around been for you guys to deal with?
Well, I can honestly tell you I'll be glad when it's finished, when the final bell goes. It is a decent fight, good fight. Obviously, there's been problems from the beginning. The proposed fight that meant to take place. Obviously, I think we all know about the history of that. I can't really talk about that, as I'm sure you're aware. But the egg slap thing, forget the egg. If you're talking about the fine or whatever, is obviously a hefty fine. But we've got to look at the sport as general. This is a major event for the sport, and therefore we have to make sure that the sport comes out well, as best as it possibly can. And whatever anybody says, forget the egg, he did physically hit him. And that obviously the board decided, and I wasn't there for the final decision with regard to the fine. I was there part of the hearing, for sure. Then I have to leave when they make their decision. But they felt it was very, very serious. Also, the other thing is, there's 4 other fights on there. If something would have gone wrong and somebody, top of the bill, couldn't fight, that affects the promoter. That affects 8 other boxers.
Are you happy that this fight is going on, Robert? I mean, it's steeped in controversy. I know you don't want to dance too much around the Conor Benn situation, but it feels like you guys have been circumnavigated in that situation, and it feels like that the answer was never really given. Do you consider Conor Benn to be exonerated?
I have to be very careful, Simon, as you know, with the legal issues, etc. All I know is he appeared before, his case was done by an independent anti-doping panel. He had his suspension lifted. He now has a licence with the British Boxing Board of Control. He can box. I can't tell you more than that.
Can I just push back on that for 1 second? And I know I'm making you probably take you into an area that you don't want to go. Insofar as the findings of that report, I just want some clarification on this, if you can answer it. Whose gift is it? Because we've often understood that there's an element of confidentiality around the findings. And my understanding, which I'm either going to be corrected or confirmed, is that that confidentiality can in fact be waived by Conor Benn. Is that right?
That's correct.
Right. So as far as the ability to understand what went in that hearing, that is not being stymied by the British Boxing Board of Control or anybody else. It is, in fact, potentially a gift that Conor could give to the world by saying, here's what the findings were.
I think, yes, I'm not going to argue with that whatsoever. With the situation, we are legally bound to say what we've said. The independent panel lifted the suspension, he's okay to box. That's the end of the story.
Robert, how many times have these fighters, or have they even been tested in the build-up to this fight? Where are we at with that now?
They've been tested by VADA at the present time. When they get back into the country, etc. Conor's in Spain at the moment, I believe. They'll be tested by UCAD as well. So there'll be 2 sets of tests going on.
So the testing goes ahead because one of them obviously in Dubai and one of them's in Spain training, but they're still on regular tests.
Still VADA's still doing the test at the present time.
And what is the situation with VADA? What's their stance on it now? I mean, with their recognition of their testing?
With regard to the board, any legitimate testing organisation, we take the results and we deal with it disciplinary-wise.
When you look at, I'm going to move you on from the I mean, I'm assuming that the testing regime is prolific, and ultimately everyone's going to be satisfied with the fact that the amount of tests are being put in place, irrespective of whether they're training in different parts of the world.
Yes.
Yeah. When we get to the situation surrounding the egg slap, you've touched upon it a moment ago, but how does one arrive at the kind of fines that you guys meted out? How do you get to that level?
I think, Simon, as I said before, the board, the stewards of the board who heard that, who were there for the hearing, felt this was a very important contest. This is just ramifications for the whole show, etc. Now, whether the fine is heavy or not, Mr. Eubank has appealed the decision, actually, so there will be an appeal taking place. So that fine could be reduced or it could be increased. It goes in front of a completely independent appeal stewards. Although they are the British Boxing Board of Control appeal stewards, they are not the board. They are self-appointed, they're KCs, etc., and solicitors. They will deal with the matter. That appeal, should it take place, we're just waiting for a couple of things to be organised. When that appeal takes place will be June, beginning of June, middle of June. They'll make a decision there on Mr. Eubank's argument as the fine was too heavy, as far as he's concerned. I believe the fine was about right. It's a very serious matter. There's ramifications for the whole show with regard to not just their fight, but everybody else's fight. Anybody else is injured. I mean, I'm not being funny, forget the egg bit, but, you know, if that happened outside of that venue in the streets, Mr. Benn could go in for assault.
How do you come up with, you know, because that is a hefty fine, 100,000, you know, if it happened on a smaller show, at a smaller magnitude, obviously the fine would be nowhere near as substantial. But how do you come up with that figure, and where does the money go?
Is it means tested, is what he's asking?
Means tested, ultimately it's means tested. Yeah. They're obviously earning substantial amount of money on this show, so therefore it's means tested to a certain extent. The money goes to the board's charity. This is something that's been frustrating. It's in the board rules. Boxers and licence holders know it goes to the charity, or they should know it goes to the charity. And the charity is a separate organisation from the board. And what we do is we look after ex-boxers and ex-licence holders who have fallen on hard times at Christmas, during the course of the year. And also it goes towards medical research, etc., medical seminars, and other work we do with regard to medicals.
Are you surprised? There has been a lot of resistance to the level of fine, not just from Eubank himself, because at one point I thought he was quite relaxed about it and seemed to be quite happy with the fact that the promotion that he'd gotten as a result of it was probably worth more than the fine. Yeah. But there has been some significant reaction. I think Paul Smith was very vociferous about where you guys coming from that level of fine. Are you surprised by that reaction? Not really, to be honest with you. It is a hefty fine, and I fully understand Paul's. I've heard Paul's thoughts, and I respect Paul's opinion. But as I said, the stewards obviously felt this is an important event, and therefore the fine should work out to be with regard to the event. So how they come up with it ultimately would have been, as you say, means tested, and the type of event it is. Where do you stand on these situations happening? They're occurring more and more now, aren't they? I mean, we've just had it with Fabio Wardley and Miller. Miller slapped him around the face, and we saw the table flipping with Jeamie TKV and David Adeleye. Where do you stand on that, Robert? Is it like you feel like the theatre show now is more and more? But what's your stance on that? To be honest with you, Spencer, I'm getting a bit fed up with it, to be honest. David and Jeamie have been called before the Southern Area Council with regard to the table flipping. That will take place in June. They'll deal with that. They'll have their explanations, etc. With regard to Miller, obviously at the present time he's not licensed by us, but there may be provisions in place with regard to we deal with him if anything else happens. But Miller's Miller. I want to talk to you. Last time you were here, in 23, there was an issue with some of the promoters' conduct, and I want to talk to you about how that's evolved. Before I do that, in October 2022, Eddie Hearn said this. I want to see your response to it.
Chris Eubank Jr has the opportunity to cancel the bout, and the British Boxing Board of Control have the opportunity to not cancel the bout. We had a very similar situation with Billy Joe Saunders, I think 2 years ago, where he failed a VADA test, and the British Boxing Board of Control said, we do not acknowledge that test. You're not suspended. You're clear to fight with us. So all of a sudden we're in this situation where the same as the Billy Joe Saunders test. Conor Benn wasn't given an opportunity to be heard during this case, so we left it with the board, who cancelled the fight. At that point, we had the choice to move forward with the fight with a different commission, or to legally challenge their decision, which we would have won immediately. Of course, because of the backlash, because of the feeling, we don't want to go against our governing body. We don't want to go against the British Boxing Board of Control. We don't want to bring in a new commission. It looks terrible. It's not right. We said, fair enough. We postpone the fight, subject to the hearing that will unfold. So, again, I get your point, but it's not just a case of clean it under the carpet and on we go. The information that was presented through scientists, through doctors, led Wasserman and Chris Eubank Jr. to say, we will proceed with this bout subject to the decision from the British Boxing Board of Control. And they will always be the one that will sanction or not sanction a fight.
You must be quite grateful for young Master Hearn there telling you that he wasn't going to challenge your governance and authority.
Fair enough, yeah. But, I mean, there's two different situations altogether. Absolutely different altogether.
How are you looking at that? I mean, obviously in 23, you said you were disappointed with the outlook and conduct of either Kalle Sauerland or Eddie Hearn. We've seen a sea change, and we're going to go on to some of that later on in the show. But how do you now look at the promoter landscape? It seems to be a much more amenable backdrop than it was previously.
Well, I think for various reasons, which I'm sure we're all aware of, people are getting on with each other, which has been unusual up until the last couple of years. So I think that's, in a way, something I've been asking for a long time. Fights to be made in different rival promotions, where before they weren't being made, but they are being made now for obvious reasons.
But that's great that they all get on well with one another. How are you guys getting on with them?
Very good. I don't have a problem with any
What's
promoters.
changed?
Nothing's changed really. We've always gone. My job is to make sure boxing's run as successfully as possible. At the present time, it's running reasonably well. Now, that's maybe nothing to do with me, but it's certainly to do with the relationship we have with promoters. And our relationship with promoters is very good, I believe. There's always going to be disputes, always, because we're dealing with people, human beings. And there's some people want their thing where we disagree with that, or the board disagree with that. And my job as the man in the middle is to negotiate with everybody to make sure everything goes as well as possible. And at the moment, everything's good.
What lessons have been learned from that saga?
I think a lot of lessons have been learned, how people deal with things. I've learned a great deal. I thought I was quite good at law, although I'm not a lawyer, but I've certainly learned a great deal about law than I ever did before, with regard to how people go around things, with regard to procedures, etc. I've learned a great deal about that. I think that's beneficial to us, certainly beneficial to me, how you deal with things in the future. So I think a lot has been learned, Spencer.
Yeah, listen, now we're here, April the 26th. You looking forward to the fight? You going to be there?
I just hope they both go home safely. That's the most important thing to me for any boxing match, any boxing tournament. I will be there, and I think it will be a decent fight.
Do you think you guys now, you and I have had various chats over the last 2 or 3 years about the structuring of your organisation. Do you think that you are now in a situation where you're as resourced as you should be, as funded as you could be, and as fit for purpose as you need to be? Because some of the things that we discussed, without breaching any particular confidences, because I'm not going to do that, I think there was a necessity to tighten rules and to be more sophisticated in your thinking. Have you evolved to that level?
Yeah, I believe we have, Simon. I think, as I say, as we were saying before, we've learned a great deal with regard to procedures, etc. Nobody ever challenged anything before with regard to what we've just gone through. Now, rules and regulations are in place to deal with that. So that's something we've learned. And obviously, with our legal people, we work through quite a lot of different things with regard to our regulations. So yes, I believe we have learned a lot. I believe we're better equipped now than we were before. And I think that's only a good thing. But you know what it's like. Sometimes you don't know something or the answer to something until it's happened. And then you've got to react. You know, you're firefighting to a certain extent because nothing's ever been challenged that way before. So we've learnt that.
We've seen recently a rather bold announcement, and perhaps a destructive one as well, alluding to the fact that boxing is broken. This is a statement made by Dana White in conjunction with Turki Al-Sheikh and their new ideals around boxing leagues. When you listen to that, what's your takeaway from that?
Well, I think it's frustrating, Simon, to be honest, because boxing isn't broken. If you look at the fights we've had taking place over the last couple of years, there's been immense. I mean, the one big moan up until 2 or 3 years ago
was making fights.
Making fights. nobody wanted to box anybody. Now we do. Now, because of circumstances and financial gain, we do. The other thing...
But there isn't an element of accuracy in what they're saying then? Someone's come along and filled the room with a big bag of cash and all these fights are now being made.
Is that an issue?
Well, it is, because ultimately, if the only way someone can fill that is by filling it with money and ulterior motives that might well be the promotion of Saudi Arabia, which they're fully entitled to have,
Absolutely.
right? Then one has to look at the system and say, well, why couldn't it have been structured in such a way that the best fights had to be made?
I fully understand what you're saying. Boxing ultimately, initially, is a sport. When you get into boxing, as you did, and when I did it because I loved it and it was a sport. As you get older, as time goes on, later on in life, in your career, it becomes a business. And therefore, the business actually talks more importantly than sport at some point. Now, we had many, many times fights weren't being made. Now, the argument is the fights aren't being made in this country, they're going to Saudi. Well, that's not actually true, is it? Well, we're on the 26th of April, we've got a big show at Tottenham. 70,000 people, or 65, 70,000 people are going to be there. We had Joshua and Daniel in Wembley, absolutely 80,000 people there. So the fights are taking place here. We are running, I think last year, 250 odd shows. Now, they might not be the big shows that talkSPORT talk about, or is on Sky, or is on DAZN, but they're taking place. So the sports in this country anyway, I can only talk about this country, it's in a healthy position. Now, I don't think boxing is broken. I think there's always people who comes in think they can do it differently or better than it's being done now.
What is your take, Robert, on Turkey Al-Sheikh, TKO, Dana White getting involved with it as well, setting up these leagues? What's your take on that? Do you think that's good for the sport? It's another avenue for sure.
I think I'm a big believer competition is what sport is. Well, competition is what business is. And this is a business. And I have no reason, if it works, obviously, it's a big gamble what they're doing with a league. Will people want to be part of starting off something and ending it? That's the biggest thing you've got. But no, I'm happy for competition. I've got no reason why I should be.
Have you had any discussions about the drug testing in that league?
I've had no discussions with regard to that league whatsoever.
All right.
Do you see yourself, how do you see it manifesting in front of people in terms of, you've got Dana White, you've got Turkey Al-Sheikh, they've got a big bag of money, they're going to go after their own agendas for their own motivations, and currently it's working quite well for boxing. How does British Boxing Board of Control interact with that?
Well, we'd be very happy to help anybody. Ultimately, when boxing started in Saudi, the first question to us was, would you come and help us set up a commission? So we said, yes, we'll come and do that. We're obviously running, for Frank Warren, we're running the shows over there under our jurisdiction. It hasn't moved on as quickly as I wanted it to with regard to setting up a commission, because we're still running it. And that's virtually 2 years down the line. So I think that could be better. I have had discussions with the people in Saudi Arabia. I want it to move a bit quicker to get them to have their own commission. It hasn't worked yet, but it doesn't mean it's not going to work. Don't just give up on something, you keep going on with it.
Do you think this is a golden age for British boxing, a halcyon period? We've got domination in the heavyweights, we've got big names in the light heavyweights, we've had world champions in the cruiserweights, we've had world title shots in the middleweights. We've got at the lower weight classes with Nick Ball and other fighters of that ilk that are really making big splashes. Do you look at it now through your prism of running the British Boxing Board of Control, say this is the golden period of British boxing?
I think you're talking to somebody who's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And my period of the best was in the 70s and 80s, etc. Right. When you remember Ali, Frazier, Foreman, etc. But for
British boxing.
But for British boxing at the present time. Don't forget, in the 70s, you had John Conte, Joe Bugner, John H. Tracy. These are great fighters.
But now we've got a litany of world champions, haven't we?
But because there's more opportunity.
Right.
What do you think the success is for British fighters right now? Because you go through those stages and those periods, but right now, Simon's right in what he says. You look at that heavyweight division, which is dominated by British fighters. We went 50-odd years without having a British champion before we got Lennox Lewis. Yeah. What do you think the success behind that is?
No, I think it's just opportunities, to be honest with you. I promote. You've got to give credit to the promoters. If it wasn't for the promoters, these things wouldn't be happening. And we happen to have a spate of good heavyweights. Reasonably good heavyweights who are the same standard. When I was young, the British heavyweight championship was big because you had Cooper, Bedell, Walker, etc. But they're all the same standard. They weren't quite world class.
As well.
Yeah. Pardon?
You also had Brian London as well.
Brian London as well, I presume so, yeah. But just about. But they weren't world class. They were European class, but they weren't world class. When they went to the next level, they got beat. This time, because of the standard we have and the ability around the world, we're doing very, very well. And we are very lucky at the present time. It will slow down. But then Moses is coming along.
Yep.
Daniel's a young boy, ultimately a young man, I should say. And, that's going to move on. But everything goes in cycles, you know. I mean everything. Football, everything, boxing, any other sport goes in cycles. We had a good time, we had a bad time, we're having a good time. But what we need is the amateurs to come through, which they are, and then that feeds us. And that's ultimately a benefit to the professional side.
Can I talk to you about Joyce?
Yeah.
A lot of people have had a lot of opinions recently about Joyce and his most recent fight, and there's been a lot of calls for him to potentially retire. And we had Tony Bellew on talkSPORT the other day who spoke brilliantly. Have a listen to what Tony had to say before I ask you about it.
Joyce's greatest attribute has always been his resilience and his durability. And I told anyone who'd listened, the minute that goes, that boy is an accident waiting to happen. And bear in mind, I like Joyce. I think the world of the lad, but he shouldn't be anywhere near a boxing ring. An interview came out before the fight, and it was taken down from social media immediately because the backlash it got. The interview lasted a couple of minutes, and Joe couldn't string more than a couple of sentences together. Joyce has been a fantastic fighter. He's been a phenomenal amateur. This guy could have been an Olympic gold medal. I think he deserved it, from being totally honest, against Tony Yoka in that final, but he didn't get it. He's been an amazing fighter, but understand that once that durability goes, that's the end of you. Once your greatest asset goes as a fighter, your greatest attribute, that's you done. And that was, I'm sorry to say, his greatest attribute. He could absorb anything. When he was getting knocked down by the likes of Derek Chisora, folded by Zhilei Zhang, it's got to be over. Promoters should not be putting him on. In my opinion, it's really, really worrying, Jim. I don't want to see a casualty. I don't want to see anything bad happen to that, because and you know what? Here's the saddest part. He's a really bright individual. He's smart. He's got so much ability that other fighters don't actually have. He's got a brain. So I want to see him use it and go on and do something else. I really do. I wish him the very best, and I hope he stays safe. Lovely, lovely man.
Robert, I have the greatest admiration and respect for fighters, probably even more so than I did for my parents' sport, football, that I was involved in. But I, like Spencer, watched that fight and I winced at times and I looked for it through my fingers. Where does the board come into situations like this?
Joe turned pro late and had a very, very tough amateur career. And he was fast-tracked to a certain extent. I mean, his first fight was a 10-rounder. He won the Commonwealth in the fourth or fifth or third or fourth. So he's been fast-tracked because of his age to a certain extent. My job is to make sure somebody, when they get in the ring, are healthy, fit and ready to go. Joe passed every single medical test we do. That includes neuropsychological tests, etc., whatever. He's done all that. It's very difficult for us to say, right, because we think you take too much punches, we're going to stop you. But when he passes every medical that's thrown at him, I would just hope that his stage of his career and his life, that the people around him talk sense to him. That, you're not going to...
So there's no medical issues with Joe? He's never failed any medicals at all?
He's never failed a medical at all.
Do you think it's the board's responsibility to be a wisdom whisperer in terms of giving him guidance?
Absolutely, I absolutely do. On regular occasions, I speak to boxers who are coming to the end of their career and say, listen, I think you should knock it on the head. But it's not for me to tell them, it's a human being, that they have their own thoughts.
Yeah.
And I just hope the people around any boxer, not just Joe, that any boxer, when they're coming to the end of their career, which he obviously is, that, we've had a great career. You've been champion here, you're an Olympic silver medalist, you've boxed with all the best in the world at the moment. Listen, it's time to give it a miss. And I hope that would happen to any boxer coming to that stage of their career.
It leads me into the next part of the conversation, which is aftercare. We had Paul Smith come on the other day who talked about the Global Fighters Association. Have a listen to what Paul said before I throw it to you. Walk me through where you're going with it, what you're doing, and how these sort of things have worked in the past.
So I had the idea years ago, obviously, of establishing a boxing union. There isn't a union in boxing. There's the PFA in football, obviously. There's other sports that have unions, and every workplace you go in is a union. I used to just think I'd love to have a minimum wage in for a fighter where it was a minimum, say, £1,000 or something more. If a fighter gets in the ring, they should have some form of health care or health cover. I had fights where I'd pull out 2 weeks before the fight with an infection in my elbow or a bruise on my hand or a cracked bone in my hand, and then all the camp you've put in, the work you've put in, you can't go and fight. If you don't fight, you don't get paid.
Yeah.
You've got to refund everyone the tickets before you know it. You've lost money on the training camp, and we see it all the time with fighters. But more importantly, recently we've seen fighters die in the ring.
Indeed.
It happens all the time. It's so unfortunate. You know firsthand more than anyone what can happen in the boxing ring, Spencer. And afterwards, there's just no aftercare. There's no, you give your life to the sport. And
the natural first question is, what's your view on a union?
Absolutely for it. I'm absolutely for it. If you remember many years ago, Barry McGuigan and Nicky Piper
I remember.
tried to set up the Professional Boxing Association. It didn't work because boxers wouldn't pay.
Agreed.
It's as simple as that. Now, we would be very happy to talk to Paul and any advice and help, etc. we can give, absolutely no problem whatsoever. I think it's a very good idea. Whether it works, I don't know, because they need to fund it themselves.
Would you think it should become compulsory as part of getting your licence that a boxer has to put X amount of his purse, say, into like a pension fund so that they've got something afterwards? Because it is that aftercare, Robert, isn't it? Like, you know, when we've seen so many great fighters, you know, champions that end up absolutely with nothing because they've not looked after their money, they've had no sort of, and they get no aftercare afterwards and they lose direction in life. Do you think that that's a great, you know, that would be something that could be put in place?
I think we're talking about things that's been tried but failed. Because ultimately,
yeah, but if it's compulsory, though.
I think it's very wrong for me to tell somebody, you've got to, out of your purse of 600 quid or whatever, if you're talking about the young boys coming in, you've got to put £10 to one side. They're going to say to me, get lost, I don't need it. Just like your pensions in your work, I don't need it, I'll deal with it later on. That has happened. I've talked to people about putting money aside and they just say, oh, I'll deal with it later on. But absolutely, very, very keen to talk to anybody with regard to them. But don't forget, these boxers are self-employed. So ultimately they're self-employed. So they have to look after themselves to a certain extent. I do believe that we can help in any way with advice and whatever. Don't forget we do have an insurance policy for permanent injury and death. So boxers do, or families do get money after somebody's passed away or permanently injured. That is an insurance policy we have, which is a very expensive insurance policy, as you'd expect, because of the nature of the sport.
Is that the length and breadth of the aftercare that the British Boxing Board of Control provides, though?
If anybody comes to us, the one thing that does frustrate me, Simon, is we don't know until it's too late, right? Ultimately, some people should come and say, listen, I need a bit of help. And we can advise them where to go. But a lot of the time, you read it in the newspaper that somebody's having a difficulty, and it's the first time I knew.
Well, I think you're a case in point, Spence. I think if I'm right, and I'm putting words in your mouth, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you were particularly happy with the aftercare that you got after your circumstances.
Well, no, I think there was no aftercare after my circumstances, right. If I'm honest. As in, I made a recovery, granted, etc. But my boxing career was over, and it was for me finding direction in life and finding my own work or whatever else. And I think, well, you're paying your boxing board of control licence, and I go, where's the support? Where's, you know, do I not get anything for that because of the extent of my injury? I never got anything from the British Boxing Board of Control. It was just, oh yeah, he looks all right. On you go, son. Yeah. And that was, I thought that was harsh.
Yeah, no, I'm not disagreeing. I mean, me and you have spoken about this. Me and you, when I rung you up when you was in hospital, to make sure everything was going with Jess Harding there, etc.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sure there's more that anybody can do. But it's difficult. It is difficult to pick. I mean, don't forget, there's more people retired than there are boxing now, and that makes it very difficult. And we're not. I mean, we are doing well financially, etc. But we're not the FA. You know, we're different things altogether.
The interesting thing with the union, before I close this subject, is when you look at it and the unions that work in sport, the only union that has any real power in sport is the PFA. And the reasons why they have the power is because they went to the broadcasters.
Yeah.
And they got the broadcasters to pay the pension, the union dues, because the players pay virtually nothing. Is that a situation you can imagine manifesting itself in boxing?
Well, the sport in this country is run completely different from football because ultimately...
But you still got broadcasters.
It's the promoter has the deal with the broadcaster.
Yeah.
We don't. We're ultimately a regulatory body. We don't make the fights. Well, we do for British Championships and whatever. But I can't tell you in the next 6 months when the shows are going to take place until the promoter tells me. So it's a completely different way of running.
But you'd be aligned with a union if a union was able to get a membership together and then leverage that membership to push back against the broadcasters and say, we want some money in the pot for fighters. You'd be aligned with them for
absolutely, that? Absolutely. For sure we would.
OK. All right. Well, let's wait and see if Paul's got a future in that particular
And I'm very happy to talk to Paul. I know he's mentioned it before to me, and I think it's a good idea. It's just a matter of
how you're going to fund it.
How you're going to fund it.
Absolutely.
Which is always the way with everything.
Absolutely. Suspense. We have the much-awaited rematch between Ben Whittaker and Liam Cameron this Sunday. You would have seen, I assume, the gloves are off.
Yes, I did.
I did as well. What was your takeaway from that?
Do you know what? Sometimes I think what I took from that was that Ben Whittaker, who's normally this flamboyant, outgoing, has the answer for everything type of guy, didn't have the answers, because I think the answers were in that performance that he had. Only he knows the answers, if I'm totally honest, and he didn't want to share them with us. That's up to him. I think he underestimated Liam Cameron going in first time round. And I've been all over the place with this one. I've gone from thinking that Ben Whittaker would have enough to turn it all around. Then after watching the build-up and watching the interviews and watching the body language of the two, I went to Liam Cameron. I'm now starting to think that Whittaker will find a way again. And I think that silence, that's what I took from that one. A lot of people were looking at that and taking a lot of, he seems rattled.
Why are you going from Arthur to Martha in short order?
Yeah, because it's one of those fights that really could be won either way. It's one of those fights that we don't really know until it happens, because that situation in that fifth round, at the end of that fifth round, when they went over the ropes, only Ben Whittaker's got the answer. Ben Whittaker has the answers on whether he was really injured or whether he wasn't. If he was injured, then he's going to deal with it. And
what did you make of his answers? I thought Johnny was asking him perfectly valid questions.
Yeah, the radio silence.
And it was just not just radio silence, he just wasn't interested in giving an answer about an injury, because apparently it's going to perhaps compromise him or breach some sort of Hippocratic oath somewhere.
I just think that he knows that he's going to look a complete tit if he doesn't perform the way he should, so he's going to want to let the answers be done in the ring. That's where I think I'm at with this one, and I just think that Ben Whittaker does have that ability. Andy Lee, by the way, I think is a huge...
Is this a statement of serious intent?
And that's where I'm sort of leaning towards Whittaker again. I think that Andy Lee's a great trainer.
What did you make of the claims that Ben was saying, that he kind of set up his training sessions as he wanted to? He did what he wanted to do.
Well,
do you believe that?
Absolutely.
With Sugar Hill?
I think there's absolutely. I think there's a lot of fighters that have had them sort of situations in the past where they've done things on their terms, and they've just got people that are working for them, just allow them to get away with certain situations.
It's not professional, is it?
No, it's not professional, but it happens. Unfortunately, it does happen. And he was saying that basically he was calling the shots. You can only go by what he was saying. Andy Lee won't allow that to happen. And I think with Hamza Shiraz signing up with Andy Lee as well, I think that's a great sparring partner for Ben Whittaker. I just think that Ben will now find a way. I really do. It's not going to be easy.
So do I. But you're preaching to the converted. I've maintained that position.
Yeah, well, I haven't, mate. I've been jumping around from, all over the place with it, because it is one of those fights that, until that bell rings, we don't know. You've
been watching the soap opera unfold around the administrative error that boxers seem to have visited upon their fighter.
Yes, I obviously have, and I've had conversations.
You've seen this before?
Only today, to be honest with you. Whoever put the contract together has made a ricket. It's quite simple as that. And it's for them to sort out. I had a discussion this morning on my way here with regard to our actions, what we would do. I don't think we need to do anything at the present time unless it's the last minute, because this is a contractual issue, and therefore they should sort it out. I'm sure they will.
So the board, as we speak right now, don't know whether it's a 10 or 12 rounder?
As far as I'm concerned, all the paperwork we've received, it's a 10-round contest.
Right, OK.
We had Ben Shalom the other day saying that it's now been... Queensberry are making sort of a lot of noise about it, trying to make him look a bit silly. I think they helped themselves to make themselves look silly by doing the error in the first place, and then going on about it forever and a day. If they haven't found an impasse and it isn't been settled and more money has been paid over to Liam Cameron as a result of going down to 10, is there any jurisdiction that you have in this area?
I think that the situation is that if we need to, I suppose we would have to get involved. I don't believe we need to do anything at the moment. Well, I don't think it looks very good at all.
No, but what, if you were to get involved, what would your involvement look like?
I think I'll just look into the contract and see what it is. Ultimately it's that.
So if the contract says 12 rounds and it's an argument, what happens with you guys go, I don't give a shit, we get on with this fight now?
Well, I think the situation, at some point, somebody's got to say, we're boxing. Are you boxing or not? If they pull the fight because of this dispute, there's still other people's going to... Will they cancel the show? There's other people being affected. So ultimately, sensible people will have to sit down at some point and discuss it. And whatever they do is that down to them. But it is a contractual issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, look, the fight goes ahead, whether it's 10 rounds, 12 rounds. You're an ex-fighter, so you understand. We've talked about this. The training is the same whether you're doing a 10, whether you're doing a 12. All right, your mindset might be slightly different knowing you're doing a 10, 12, but if you believe you're going to win, you're going to win.
Well, I put it this way. We were talking earlier. I didn't box at the same level as you, to a certain extent. But, if somebody beat me, I'd want to beat them. It doesn't matter how many rounds it is in return. And that's ultimately up to Ben. There's a reason why they want 10. There's a reason why Liam wants 12.
Yeah, of course.
But as far as I'm concerned, if you're training for a 10, you should be training for a 12.
Where are you on Whittaker with this situation? If he wins or he loses? If he loses, do you believe that the balloon, all the air's gone, and all the mythology and the iconography that's been built around Ben Whittaker and the showboating and all the stylisation of him, that's all now gone? There's no rebuild from that?
Absolutely.
Or do you think that's not necessarily prevalent?
No, I think that, look, listen, that's the character that he's built, when it comes across the way he comes across, and it's great and it sells.
Because he was keen to play it down, and he was keen to play it down.
Absolutely,
the fact that he was a very humble young man.
And that might have been a smart move from his side. He's come away from social media, which has been quite prominent in his life, if you like, and he's built up a huge social media following by the way that he is. You remember like a young Nazim Hamid many, many years ago, but you've got to back that up. Now, he's in a situation now where that situation happened last time, and like I say, only he knows. He gets the chance to rerun it and right those wrongs, but he has to win in this one. Yeah. Otherwise, that aura's gone around him. And then what is it? That's the selling point.
What about if he wins? I mean, I think he will win. I've maintained the position that I think he'll box
Liam
Cameron's head off, right? But when we look at the light heavyweight division, even just in Britain, right, and we look at Josh Boazzi, who just recently lost to Callum Smith. We look at Callum Smith. We look at Anthony Yard. Right? We look at Willie Hutchinson. Right? Where is Ben?
He's chasing the pack. It's all about timing in boxing. It's all about getting that experience, doing your apprenticeship, getting the rounds under your belt. He's not done a 12-rounder yet. He needs to do the 12-rounders. He needs all that experience. When you're talking about fighters like Joshua Boazzi, who's been there, seen it, done it. He's had to dig deep. He's had to come through those rough times. And, even with Callum Smith as well, even Dan Aziz and fighters like that, they've all done that apprenticeship. This kid is chasing the pack. He's still got a long way to go before he gets there. We're highlighting that he has star potential, his superstar quality. But that's why some of the noise has to go through that apprenticeship.
That's why some of the noise has been a little bit unrealistic, and some of the distractions, running around in Milan getting photographs of himself in various outfits is probably not the best way to operate.
I think that he's finding out himself now. I think when he turned professional, he said, "I'm going to be British champion after 5 fights." The realisation is now kicking in. This sport ain't as easy as what you think it is. It's not all about talent and just turning up. At a certain level, you get away with that. And I think against Liam Cameron last time out, he realised, actually, you need a little bit of dog in there as well.
Where are you on the Liam Cameron observation that was made to Ben that he's very big at the weight, or too big at the weight?
That's a great observation. A very, very strong point that he's got there, and I think we'll find that out again in this fight, where you look at it and you go, Whittaker's got all the talent in the world. He's got the boxing skills, the IQ, all of that. Doesn't seem to have that punch. Doesn't seem to have that punch power at that weight. And you look at him and you go, he's sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place, Robert, because the light heavyweight and cruiserweight division, there's such a gulf in weight difference in that. You look at him and go, he's huge for a light heavy, but tiny for a cruiserweight, and that's where he's at right now.
Yeah, no, I agree. He's a very talented young man. I mean, it's as simple as that. And he's got to decide whether he really wants to do it when things get really tough, whether he wants to do it. And that's something that you can't teach. That's just, you're born with that.
It's innate.
It's innate. It's as simple. But as I say, he's very talented. Liam's very, very good boxer, very, very tough. And so I think it was a good lesson. I mean, you mustn't forget, people have been beaten before. I mean, Alan Minter was beaten 2 or 3 times, and he went on to win a world title, and he was an Olympic medalist as well. So it's not new. It's what you learn from it is the most important thing, and the people around. Again, Andy Lee's a good addition. It's the people around you.
But I guess it's who you get beaten by and at what stage in your career you get beaten.
But I don't think this. If he were to lose again, I don't think. Depending how he lost, I don't think it would be a disaster for him. He's still young, but. Depends if he were to lose, how he would lose, and also if he wins, how he wins. Because if it's a really squeaky decision, they'll be screaming for a third fight.
Talking about rebuilds, we see Fraser Clark on the undercard after that savage knockout by Fabio Wardley. What's your take on Fraser coming back in?
Well, he's got Ebenezer Teti, who's a tough guy. He's an unpredictable character. Yeah, Daniel Dubois blew him away in a round, but we saw him last time out losing in 7 rounds to Dillian Whyte, and he was giving Dillian Whyte some problems and making Dillian Whyte answer some questions. He's unpredictable. He's heavy-handed. And you go for Fraser Clark as a comeback fight with what he went through, and that was brutal. We was all out there in Saudi, and you saw the disfigure in his face. and you looked at it and thought, wow. And I saw him at the airport the following day, and it was like they'd done an amazing job out there. I must say, the surgeon's done an amazing job. Rebuilt his cheek out. I didn't expect to see him in the ring. What was it, 4 or 5 months ago now? Yeah, 5 months ago. I can't believe, actually, that he's in a ring so soon after having such a significant injury. And I hope that doesn't play on his mind going into that one. Because, like I say, Tetty's a dangerous opponent. Like, at this stage with the injuries he's coming off.
We're all going to wish Fraser well, aren't we? Because we're all very fond of
Fraser. I think with Fraser, though, because of his age, you've got to come back quick.
Yeah.
You've got to come back with a decent fight.
Yep.
You can't...
Get rid of
not
the demons.
for me, I'm not a matchmaker for his mate. But you've got to get rid of the demons, and he'll find out.
Yeah.
But he's a very talented young man in a division that actually is, you know, for him, is winnable. British title fight, you know, whatever, you know.
Absolutely. We'll see. We'll see. Good luck to Fraser. Spence Boots Ennis adds the WBA welterweight title to his already established IBF credentials by knocking out Stanionis.
Yeah.
I mean, I watched the fight. It was a masterclass. There was a gap, a significant gap between a very credible world champion in his own right and Boots Ennis.
Stanionis was an undefeated champion himself, and he's a very tough fighter that likes to come forward and wear fighters down. He's particularly good to the body as well. But yeah, Boots Ennis, what a masterclass. He controlled the space and actually beat Stanionis at his own game on the inside, and then body shots, whipping in the uppercuts. He's going to be tough to beat, Boots Ennis. I think that you're looking at it and you go, who's out there? The only one that you could even think that would come close to beating him in that division is obviously the pound-for-pound king in Terence Crawford. That is a mouth-watering contest going off Boots Ennis' last performance. I thought that was sensational. You look at fighters, Robert, that come around from time to time and you go, there's standout ones that have that star quality. And for me, Boots Ennis is a pound-for-pound star for sure.
I mean, it's just class.
Yeah.
I mean, what he did was class. You know, how he took him apart was class.
Yeah.
And you know, ultimately, you teach from your basics, you teach when they're young, etc. But there's just something about it's that X factor. I don't know what the X factor is, but it's the X factor.
Yeah.
When he has it.
When you look at that, and you look at Conor Benn at welterweight, they're in different zip codes, aren't they?
There's not a conversation there right now. You know, I think that, you know, Boots Ennis is, you know, he's just one of those fighters that's done it the right way as well. You look at him, what's he like, 33, 34 fights in now, huge knockout ratio, but he's learnt the trade, learnt the game, and you can see that he's a student of the sport, the way that he picks his shots and whatnot. Yeah, there's a golfing difference there, yeah.
Can I ask you about your reaction to the circumstances between David Adeleye and Jeamie TKV? Obviously, some of the decision was taken out of your hands to some extent because the fighters already made it clearly evident that they were going to have a rematch. But when you looked at the whole situation as an overall, what was your initial reaction and considered one?
Well, I wasn't very happy. I mean, I think the immediate rematch had to be called, to be fair, which is what the board did as soon as they could, when the meeting was on the Wednesday. We have called the referee to appear before them in June to explain explain how he dealt with it. And I really, it would be unfair for me to talk any further with regard to what he's going to say. But I think it was unfortunate, and we've got a rematch.
So hang on, Spence.
Sorry.
You didn't have to order a rematch because they were going to make one anyway. But the fact of the matter, you would have made a rematch. Can I ask you what was different then between this situation with David Adeleye and Jeamie TKV and Ron Kearney and Steve Gray and Hamza Shearez and Bradley Skeet, which was a bugbear of mine because you didn't intervene. Clearly, the fighter was hit when he was down, and his outcome was dramatically compromised because he was knocked out 45 seconds later. Why didn't you guys have the balls to deal with that then? You had the balls to deal with this one.
No. I think balls is a bit wrong. I think because the referee acted within the rules, and we've discussed this many, many times. He had discretion to do what he did. He didn't break the referee. Steve Gray did not break the rules in what he did. He gave him time to recover. The boxer said he was okay to box. Now, we can argue, as long as we go blue in the face, what should have happened, or what you think should have happened, or what I think should have happened. That's happened. It's done. It's finished. With regard to this case, we weren't very happy with a number of issues. It was a scrappy fight. It was a very difficult fight to referee. However, we need to talk to the referee with regard to the actions he took towards the end of the bout.
Two big guys that obviously it was a rough fight right from the beginning, and it's down to the referee then to take control of that situation, as you know, Robert, right? So I'm just looking at that there, and you're looking at Ron Kearney and you're going, he didn't want to commit. He was sort of like tapping the gloves and calling break. But you go, in them circumstances, the referee has to get in there, break them up, whatever else. Do you think there's a lesson to be learnt here that you maybe go, when you've got the two big guys like that in a ring and they've got a referee who's quite a small guy, you look in there and go, perhaps there should be bigger referees put in place for that one to be able to control the situation, because maybe he didn't want to commit because it was a rough, dirty fight. And fighters will keep doing that if they can get away with it.
Two things. Mills Lane didn't do too bad a job. He was quite small.
Yeah, but he clearly had balls.
Also, you've got in Britain, Victor Loughlin did Chisora and Fury, did a good job, right? This referee is relatively new as a star-class referee. It was initially meant to be an English title fight, so you wouldn't think anything of it. I think if a referee is good, he can deal with any situation. So I don't quite agree with regard to the size of the referee.
Well, then no. So that was the second part of my question was going to be then. He should have committed more. He should have put himself in that situation.
That's something for him to tell us.
Just out of curiosity, he's not telling you this until June.
No. We've had a written report, but the opportunity for him to come before the board is when the board decide what action to take, if any action to take with him, will be June.
So what happens in between now and June? Does he continue to referee fights? Because obviously you're not satisfied with the outcome because you've ordered a rematch.
I appoint for championships monthly, so there's nothing out in May for him. Right.
Okay. Can I talk to you before we finish?
However, he may do a small show where he comes from.
But is that right, though? It's like, I've got to say, from the point of view of, I've always had this massive problem with a football referee refereeing a Premier League game, making the holics of it, and then being dumped into the Championship. And so, as if it's less important. Isn't it the case of if someone's made a bad set of decisions, that the better course of action would be that they don't referee any fight, because each fight, at whatever level it's at, is important to the individual fighters until such a time as the board are satisfied that they have the credentials and the qualities to be able to do it whatever level it's at.
I don't fully agree with that. I'm a big believer you fall off a horse, you get back on it and get on with it. Now, he won't be appointed to any major fights because all those fights have already been done. I don't see any reason for stopping somebody because you're not going to gain anything by doing that. Nothing's going to change. That's my opinion.
But if you're not fit for purpose, you're not fit for purpose.
Well, I think there's a difference between a 4-round fight in somewhere, little leisure centre somewhere.
Why? What do you mean? Because of the financial value of it? Or
no, not the financial value, the quality of the people, etc. So I don't think there's any reason why we can't appoint him. As it happens, he comes from an area where there's not many shows, so he's not actually working anything at the moment. But I'm not a big believer in stopping people from working. I think they should work. The more you work, the better you get.
But you're just saying that it's at what sort of level that he works at?
It's the level.
Do you agree with that, Spence?
Well, listen, until he's got that hearing, I totally agree.
I'm just wondering why a hearing takes 3 months to get.
Yeah, no, but
that's not fair.
That's a different situation. You don't know what the board have got on.
That's not fair. He was called to May. He's away. He's unavailable for the May meeting. There's no rush. We know what the result is. There's no rush to do it. We'll do it in June.
Well, let's hope that he exhibits a little bit more competency in the next set of fights he does than the one he did
we'll find out, won't we?
Right, that's it for episode 116 of Talk Boxing with Simon Jordan and Spencer Oliver. Robert, thank you very much for joining us.
No problem.
And we'll see you lot next time we're out.